When police broke down the door of 1847 Maple Grove Lane, they expected to find evidence of a crime. What they found instead was something that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. A basement that hadn't been fully emptied, a collection of Polaroids still warm to the touch, and a calendar on the wall with tomorrow's date circled in what looked like dried blood. Before we continue, subscribe, like, drop a comment, and turn on notifications, because I drop interesting stories like this always. Ridgemont, Pennsylvania, population 8,000, the kind of town where everyone knows everyone, where doors are left unlocked and children play in the streets until the streetlights flicker on. The year was 1997, before social media, before Ring doorbells, before we learned to be afraid of our neighbors. This is the story of how one man destroyed that innocence forever, and how the darkest secrets aren't always hidden in shadows. Sometimes they're buried right in our own backyards. Thomas Harker moved to 1847 Maple Grove Lane in the spring of 1989. He was 42 years old, recently divorced, and according to everyone who met him, the perfect neighbor. He worked as an accountant for a mid-sized insurance firm downtown. He kept his lawn immaculate, trimmed every Saturday morning at exactly 8 a.m. He brought cookies to the neighborhood block parties, homemade chocolate chip, the recipe he said came from his mother. Martha Hendricks lived 3 houses down. She remembers the day Thomas moved in, remembers helping him carry boxes from the U-Haul truck, remembers thinking how polite he was, weighing how he always looked you in the eye when he spoke. He was soft-spoken, she told investigators later, her hands shaking as she held a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. He had this way of listening to you, really listening, like what you were saying was the most important thing in the world. My daughter Sarah used to babysit for him when his nephew would visit. She trusted him, we all did. The house itself was unremarkable, a 2-story colonial with white siding and black shutters, a small front porch with a swing that creaked in the wind, a detached garage at the end of a gravel driveway, and a backyard, a 1/4 acre of grass surrounded by a tall privacy fence that Thomas installed himself that first summer. For the dogs, he told the neighbors. He never got dogs. For 8 years, Thomas Harker lived his quiet life. When he went to work, he came home, he waved to neighbors. He attended church every other Sunday at First Presbyterian. He volunteered at the local library, helping to organize the annual book sale. On the surface, his life was so ordinary it was almost boring. But behind that privacy fence, in the basement of that ordinary house, Thomas Harker was building something else entirely. It started with Jennifer Roth in June of 1991. 23 years old, brunette, 5'4". She worked the evening shift at the Sunoco station on Route 422. Jennifer had dreams of going to art school, had a portfolio full of charcoal drawings she kept in the trunk of her 1984 Honda Civic. On June 14th, she clocked out at 11 p.m., waved goodbye to her manager, and walked to her car in the parking lot. Security footage shows her getting in and restarting the engine. The tape runs for another 6 minutes. She never drives away. The car was found the next morning, engine cold, keys still in the ignition, driver's door slightly ajar. Jennifer Roth was gone. The police investigated. They questioned her boyfriend, her ex-boyfriend, her estranged father. They searched the woods behind the gas station. They dragged the nearby creek. They found nothing. After 6 weeks, the case went cold. The town mourned. They hung yellow ribbons. They held a candlelight vigil. And then slowly they moved on. 14 months later, in August of 1992, Rebecca Walsh disappeared. 19 years old, blonde, college student home for the summer. She was last seen leaving a party near the state park, walking toward her friend's car. She never made it. The car was parked 300 yards away. Rebecca's shoes were found on the path between, both of them placed side by side, laces still tied, like she'd stepped out of them or been carried. The police made the connection immediately. 2 young women, similar builds, both vanished without a trace in Ridgemont. A special task force was formed. FBI agents came to town. The media descended. For months, Ridgemont was gripped by fear. Parents didn't let their daughters out after dark. The annual Halloween parade was canceled. Gun sales tripled. But then nothing happened. No more disappearances, no bodies found, no breaks in the case. The FBI agents left. The media moved on to other stories. The fear slowly faded into uneasy memory. People told themselves it had been a transient, someone passing through, someone who was long gone now. They were wrong. In November of 1994, Ashley Martinez vanished from the parking lot of Ridgemont Community College. 20 years old, nursing student, last seen walking to her car after an evening class. Her car was later found in the lot, locked, her textbook still on the passenger seat. Ashley was gone. 3 women, 3 years apart. The pattern was undeniable now, but it was also baffling. The police had no suspects, no evidence, no witnesses. It was as if these women had simply ceased to exist, stepped out of reality and into nothing. Families hired private investigators. Psychics claimed to have visions. Conspiracy theories spread through the town like poison. Some people believed it was a cult. Others whispered about human trafficking. A few even suggested something supernatural, something that couldn't be explained. The truth was so much simpler, and so much worse. Thomas Harker attended all 3 candlelight vigils. What the police didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that Thomas Harker had a routine. Every action in his life was planned, measured, controlled. This wasn't impulsive. This wasn't rage. This was something far more calculated, far more patient. He would spend months watching, learning schedules, patterns, habits. He knew which women walked alone at night, which ones worked late shifts, which ones took the same route home every day. He knew which parking lots had broken lights, which roads had long stretches without houses. He was meticulous, methodical. His vehicle was a 1987 Dodge van, painted a forgettable beige, registered under his ex-wife's maiden name. A detail that kept it off investigative radar for years. The inside was modified. The windows were tinted so dark they were essentially black. There were no seats in the back, just a carpeted floor with tie-down points bolted into the frame. There was a toolbox, a cooler, a first aid kit, everything you'd expect in a work van, and a few things you wouldn't. The approach was always the same. He never grabbed anyone off the street, never broke into homes. That was sloppy, desperate. Thomas was neither of those things. Instead, he created situations. A flat tire on a dark road. He'd scattered nails earlier that day. An engine that wouldn't start in a parking lot. A disconnected battery cable, loosened in the 30 seconds it took for someone to run into the store. Car trouble that required help, and Thomas Harker was always there to help. "Let me take a look," he'd say, friendly, concerned. "I'm pretty good with cars." While they stood there waiting, grateful, he'd slip something into their water bottle, their coffee cup, anything they left in the cup holder. Fast-acting, tasteless. Within 5 minutes, they'd be disoriented, confused. Within 10, they'd be unconscious. He'd help them into his van. "I think you need to sit down, you don't look well," and drive away. To anyone watching, it looked like a good Samaritan helping someone who was sick. No one ever watched. The basement at 1847 Maple Grove Lane had been extensively renovated. Thomas did all the work himself over the course of several months in 1990, before the first disappearance. He told neighbors he was building a woodworking shop, showed them plans for cabinets and bookshelves he wanted to make. They nodded, impressed by his ambition. And the basement was divided into 3 sections. The first section, nearest the stairs, was exactly what he described. A woodworking area with a table saw, a drill press, shelves of tools. This was the only part anyone would see if they ever came down. It was dusty, neglected, filled with half-finished projects. Perfect camouflage. Behind the woodworking area was a second door. Heavy, soundproofed. The kind of door you'd find in a recording studio. Behind that door was the second section, a small room maybe 10 by 12 feet. Bare concrete walls, a drain in the center of the floor. Fluorescent lights that hummed constantly, a chair, a table. Everything was white, clinical, sterile. This was where Thomas worked. And behind another soundproof door was the third section, the smallest room. This one had a bed, a toilet, a sink. The walls were padded, covered in thick foam that absorbed sound. There were cameras in the corners, their red recording lights constant, unwavering. This was where he kept them. Jennifer Roth was in that room for 43 days, Rebecca Walsh for 38 days, Ashley Martinez for 51 days. The cameras recorded everything. Thomas would watch the footage later, in his living room upstairs, taking notes in a leather journal he kept locked in his bedroom closet. What he did during those days is detailed in police reports that remain sealed. The physical evidence was cataloged, photographed, documented. The psychological torture was evident in every corner of those rooms, but the specifics, those are locked away, and perhaps that's a mercy. What we know is that Thomas Harker saw himself as conducting research. He kept detailed records, medical observations, psychological notes. He measured pain thresholds, breaking points, the exact moment when hope died in someone's eyes. He was methodical about it, scientific, as if by reducing human suffering to data points and measurements, he could somehow strip away his own humanity, could pretend this was anything other than what it was, pure evil. The privacy fence Thomas installed in 1989 served multiple purposes. It kept neighbors from seeing into his yard. It provided a sound barrier. And it concealed what was perhaps the most horrifying aspect of his crimes. Thomas Harker was an avid gardener. Everyone knew this. His flower beds were the envy of the neighborhood. Roses that bloomed in impossible colors, hydrangeas the size of dinner plates, a vegetable garden that produced tomatoes so large and perfect they won ribbons at the county fair. People would stop to compliment his green thumb. He'd smile, thank them, offer to share his secrets. He never did share the real secret. The soil in Thomas Harker's backyard was the richest in Ridgemont. Dark, loamy, perfect for growing. It was also filled with bone meal, human bone meal, ground so fine it was indistinguishable from organic fertilizer. Beneath the roses that Martha Hendricks admired were the remains of Jennifer Roth. Under the tomato plants that won the blue ribbon were pieces of Rebecca Walsh. The hydrangeas grew so large because they were fed with Ashley Martinez. Thomas had a wood chipper in his garage, industrial grade, the kind used for clearing brush. He told neighbors he used it for yard work, tree for turning branches into mulch. They believed him because why wouldn't they? He was Thomas Harker. He made cookies for block parties. After he was finished with his victims in the basement, after the cameras stopped recording and the journals were filled with observations, Thomas would transport the bodies to the garage in the middle of the night. The wood chipper was loud, but he only ran it during the day, when other neighbors were running lawnmowers and leaf blowers. The sound blended in, became invisible. What came out the other end was scattered across the garden beds, mixed with peat moss and compost, worked into the soil. By the time spring came, by the time the roses bloomed, there was nothing left to find. Nothing but flowers. For 6 years, Thomas Harker tended his garden. And for 6 years, we three families waited for daughters who would never come home. In March of 1997, Thomas Harker made his first mistake. It was subtle, so small that even he didn't notice it at first. But it was enough. Her name was Catherine "Cat" Morrison. 21 years old, red hair, studying criminal justice at the community college. She worked part-time at the Ridgemont Public Library, the same library where Thomas volunteered. They knew each other, would chat during his shifts, talking about books, about the weather, about nothing important. Thomas had been watching Cat for 3 months. He knew her schedule, knew she stayed late at the library every Tuesday night to study, knew she parked in the back lot where the lights had been broken for weeks. The town had filed a work order to fix them, but budget cuts meant it hadn't been prioritized. Thomas knew this because he checked. On Tuesday, March 18, 1997, Thomas loosened the battery cable on Cat's 1993 Toyota Corolla. He waited in his van, parked 3 spaces away. At 9:47 p.m., Cat left the library, got in her car, turned the key. Nothing. She tried again. Still nothing. He watched her through the van's tinted windows, watched her frustration, watched her look around the empty parking lot. Thomas got out of the van, approached her car, tapped on the window. "Car trouble?" he asked, friendly, concerned, the perfect neighbor. Cat recognized him from the library. She smiled, relieved. "It won't start. The battery's new. I just had it replaced last month." "Let me take a look," Thomas said. "I'm pretty good with cars." He opened the hood, pretended to examine the engine. "I reconnected the battery cable just enough to keep it from starting." "Could be the alternator," he said. "These Toyotas, sometimes they just go." "I've got some tools in my van. Let me grab them." He walked back to the van, opened the side door, reached for the drugged water bottle he'd prepared. This was the moment, the point of no return. He'd done this 3 times before. It always worked, but this time something was different. A car pulled into the parking lot. Headlights swept across the pavement. Thomas froze, the water bottle hidden behind his back. A young couple got out, walked toward the library, laughing about something. They nodded to Cat, waved. She waved back. Thomas walked back to Kat's car empty-handed. "You know what? I think it might just be a loose connection," he said, reaching under the hood, reconnecting the battery cable properly this time. "Try it now." Kat turned the key. The engine started immediately. She laughed, surprised and grateful. "Thank you so much. I don't know what I would have done." "Happy to help," Thomas said. He smiled, waved as she drove away. And then he stood there in the empty parking lot, heart pounding, hands shaking. For the first time in 6 years, his routine had been interrupted. For the first time, something had gone wrong. He should have walked away, should have recognized this as a sign, a warning, should have stopped. But Thomas Harker had been doing this for too long. The urge was too strong, the need too great. He couldn't stop, not now. 3 weeks later, he tried again. April 8, 1997, Tuesday night, the same library, the same parking lot. But this time, Thomas didn't wait for mechanical failure. This time, he was desperate, sloppy. This time, he approached Kat directly as she walked to her car. "Kat," he called out. She turned, smiled when she recognized him. "Oh, hi, Thomas. Working late?" "Just finished up," he said, moving closer. "Hey, I found a book I thought you might like. It's in my van. It's about criminal psychology. I remembered you mentioning you were interested in that." Kat hesitated. Something felt off. The parking lot was empty again, but this time it felt different. The air was wrong. Thomas's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "That's okay," she said, backing toward her car. "Maybe you could bring it by the library tomorrow?" "It'll just take a second," Thomas said, and his hand reached out, grabbed her arm. Not gently, not like a neighbor, like something else. White Kat pulled away, fear flooding through her. "Don't touch me." "I just want to show you the book," Thomas said, and there was something in his voice now, something dark and hungry and wrong. Kat ran. She made it to her car, fumbled with her keys, got the door open. Thomas grabbed at her again, but she was faster, younger. She got inside, locked the doors, started the engine. Thomas stood there in the parking lot, watching her drive away, his face twisted into something that wasn't quite human anymore. Kat Morrison drove straight to the police station. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the steering wheel. She told the officer on duty everything, how Thomas had grabbed her, how he'd been too insistent about the book, how his smile had disappeared when she refused. The officer took her statement and made her promise to call if Thomas contacted her again. But there wasn't enough for an arrest, wasn't even enough for a restraining order. He'd grabbed her arm in a parking lot. Could have been a misunderstanding, could have been nothing. But Detective Sarah Chen, who happened to be at the station filing paperwork, overheard the conversation, and something about it bothered her. The name Thomas Harker sounded familiar. She couldn't place why. At 2 in the morning, unable to sleep, Chen pulled up the old case files on her laptop. Jennifer Roth, Rebecca Walsh, Ashley Martinez, 3 women who'd vanished from Ridgemont, 3 cases that had gone cold. She started looking for connections. Anyone who'd been present at all 3 disappearance sites, anyone who'd attended all 3 vigils, anyone who'd volunteered to help search. She cross-referenced names, dates, locations. And there it was, Thomas Harker, present at every vigil, volunteered for every search party, lived within 5 miles of every disappearance site, owned a van, worked with all 3 victims at some point. Jennifer had been a customer at the gas station where he bought coffee every morning. Rebecca had taken an accounting class at the community college where Thomas did guest lectures. Ashley had studied in the library where Thomas volunteered. It wasn't proof, not even close, but it was enough for a warrant. On April 12, 1997, at 6:47 a.m., a team of police officers and federal agents surrounded 1847 Maple Grove Lane. They had a search warrant based on Kat Morrison's complaint and the circumstantial connections Detective Chen had uncovered. They expected to find maybe some evidence, maybe some suspicious items. They didn't expect what they found. Thomas Harker answered the door in his bathrobe, coffee mug in hand, looking confused and concerned. "Officers, is something wrong?" "We have a warrant to search the premises," Detective Chen said, holding up the paperwork. "Of course," Thomas said, stepping aside. "I don't understand, but please come in. I have nothing to hide." He was calm, cooperative, polite. He offered to make coffee, asked if they needed anything, watched as they went through his living room, his kitchen, his bedroom. didn't flinch when they opened closets, moved furniture, checked under beds. But when they opened the door to the basement, his expression changed. Just for a second. Just a flicker of something dark passing behind his eyes. The basement stairs creaked as the team descended. They saw the woodworking area first. Dusty, normal, exactly what you'd expect. Detective Chen was about to call it off, was starting to think they'd made a mistake, when Officer James Rodriguez noticed something odd about the far wall. "This doesn't make sense," he said, tapping the wall. "The basement should extend further. There's space missing." They found the hidden door behind a shelf unit. It took 4 men to move it. Behind it was the soundproof door. Behind that was the room, the white room, the drain, the cameras, the chair with leather restraints still attached, the table with instruments arranged in neat rows, the smell of bleach and something underneath it, something worse. "Jesus Christ," someone whispered. They found the third room, the padded cell, the bed, the toilet, the cameras still recording. On are their red lights blinking in the darkness. And then they went upstairs and arrested Thomas Harker. He didn't resist, didn't say a word, just stood there with that same calm expression, as if he'd been expecting this, as if he'd always known this day would come. The search of 1847 Maple Grove Lane took 3 days. They brought in forensics teams from 3 states. They brought in cadaver dogs, ground-penetrating radar, forensic botanists. They tore that house apart, board by board, brick by brick. In Thomas's bedroom closet, they found the journals. 17 of them, leather-bound, filled with neat handwriting that detailed every moment of his crimes. The journals included dates, times, observations, measurements. He'd rated his victims' pain on a scale of 1 to 10. He'd documented their psychological deterioration with the detachment of a scientist studying lab rats. He'd included sketches, diagrams, notes on what worked and what didn't. In the garage, they found the wood chipper. Forensic analysis would later reveal trace amounts of human DNA in the machinery, even after extensive cleaning. In the basement, they found over 400 hours of video footage. The police who had to watch it for evidence would later require years of therapy. Some never fully recovered, but it was the backyard that confirmed the worst fears. The cadaver dogs went insane in the garden. They hit on every flower bed, every plant, every carefully tended row of vegetables. The forensic team began excavating. What they found was bone fragments, hundreds of them, scattered throughout the soil. Teeth, wire pieces of jewelry that had been missed, a class ring with the initials JR, a silver bracelet engraved with the name Rebecca, a small cross necklace that Ashley Martinez's mother would later identify through tears. Thomas Harker had literally fed his victims to his garden, had scattered their remains like fertilizer, had grown prize-winning tomatoes from their bones. Martha Hendricks, the neighbor who'd lived 3 houses down, who'd eaten those tomatoes at summer barbecues, would never eat again without feeling sick. The investigation expanded. Police began looking into Thomas's entire life, every place he'd lived, every woman who'd gone missing in those areas. They found connections to 17 unsolved disappearances across 3 states, spanning back to 1982. Jennifer Roth, Rebecca Walsh, Arna and Ashley Martinez were the only victims in Ridgemont, but they weren't the only victims. The trial of Thomas Harker began in September of 1997 and lasted for 3 months. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence: the journals, the videos, the forensic analysis of the backyard, the testimony of Kat Morrison, who'd barely escaped. The defense tried to argue insanity, but the journals proved otherwise. This wasn't madness. This was calculated, planned, executed with perfect sanity. Thomas Harker sat at the defense table every day in a neat suit and tie, his expression never changing. He didn't testify, didn't speak, just sat there, hands folded, while the parade of horrors was revealed to the world. The families of the victims attended every day. Jennifer's mother aged 10 years during the trial. Rebecca's father had to be restrained when the videos were described in testimony. Ashley's sister sat in the front row, staring at Thomas with an expression of pure hatred, willing him to look at her. He never did. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. They found Thomas Harker guilty on all counts. 3 counts of first-degree murder, 3 counts of kidnapping, multiple counts of assault, desecration of human remains, and a list of other charges that filled 3 pages. At sentencing, the judge asked if Thomas had anything to say. He stood, buttoned his suit jacket, and spoke his first public words since his arrest. "I regret nothing," he said. His voice was calm, measured, the same voice that had offered to help with car trouble, that had brought cookies to block parties. I understand you need to punish me. I understand society's rules. But I want you to know that what I did was necessary for me, and I would do it again. The courtroom erupted. Families screamed. Bailiffs had to restore order. The judge, her face white with fury, sentenced Thomas Harker to 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. As he was led away, Thomas Harker smiled. Just once, just for a second. A small, private smile that said he'd already won, that no prison could touch what lived inside him. The house at 1847 Maple Grove Lane was demolished in the winter of 1998. The lot sat empty for years, overgrown with weeds, a scar on the neighborhood that no one wanted to touch. Eventually, it was paved over and turned into a small park. There's a bench there now with a plaque that reads, "In memory of those we lost." It doesn't mention names. Now, everyone in Ridgemont knows anyway. Martha Hendricks moved away in 1998, sold her house at a loss, and relocated to Colorado. She couldn't walk past that empty lot without feeling sick. The last time anyone spoke to her, she said she still had nightmares about the tomatoes, about the roses, about everything she'd unknowingly consumed. Kat Morrison finished her criminal justice degree and became a victim advocate. She works with survivors of violent crimes, helps them navigate the legal system, holds their hands when they have to testify. She says Thomas Harker didn't break her, just showed her what she was meant to do with her life. Some nights, though, she still wakes up in a cold sweat, remembering his hand on her arm, his smile disappearing, the darkness in his eyes. Detective Sarah Chen became something of a reluctant hero. She received commendations, was promoted, was offered positions with the FBI. She turned them all down. She stayed in Ridgemont, working cold cases, determined to find answers for other families waiting in the dark. The Harker case changed her, made her see patterns where others saw random violence. She never missed another connection. The families of Jennifer Roth, Rebecca Walsh, and Ashley Martinez formed a support group. They meet once a month in the basement of First Presbyterian Church, the same church where Thomas Harker used to attend services. They talk about their daughters, share memories, help each other through the hard days. The grief never goes away, but it becomes bearable when it's shared. Thomas Harker is incarcerated at SCY Green, a maximum security prison in Pennsylvania. He's kept in solitary confinement for his own protection, even among murderers and rapists. What he did is considered too depraved. He spends 23 hours a day alone in a cell. He doesn't receive visitors, doesn't write letters, doesn't file appeals, but he does write. Prison officials have confiscated 17 new journals over the years, filled with the same neat handwriting, the same clinical observations. Now he writes about prison life, about the other inmates, about the guards. He rates their pain on a scale of 1 to 10. He documents their psychological deterioration. He sketches, diagrams, takes notes. The prison psychiatrist who evaluated him said Thomas Harker has no capacity for remorse, no ability to empathize with his victims. His brain, she said, is wired differently. He sees people as objects, as experiments. It has things to be studied and consumed. He is, in the clinical sense of the word, a psychopath. But even that label feels inadequate for what he is. Despite the conviction, despite the overwhelming evidence, questions remain. The police identified 17 possible additional victims across 3 states, but Thomas never confessed to any crimes beyond the 3 in Ridgemont. The journals mention previous subjects, but provide no identifying details. The videos found in his basement only showed Jennifer, Rebecca, and Ashley. Where are the others? How many were there really? Thomas Harker spent 15 years living in different cities before settling in Ridgemont. How many gardens did he tend? How many neighbors thanked him for the tomatoes? And perhaps the most disturbing question of all, how many others are out there like him, living quiet lives in quiet neighborhoods, keeping their lawns immaculate, bringing cookies to block parties, while behind closed doors, behind privacy fences, they tend their own dark gardens? The FBI created a task force after the Harker case to investigate long-term missing persons cases with similar patterns. They've identified at least 47 cases across the United States that share characteristics with Harker's crimes. Women who vanished without a trace, from towns where a resident had recently installed a privacy fence or bought a wood chipper, or won prizes at the county fair for unusually robust gardens. The task force is still active, still investigating, still searching for answers. Some families are still waiting. In the aftermath of Thomas Harker's arrest, when psychologists and criminal profilers analyzed his case extensively, they wanted to understand how someone could hide such monstrous behavior for so long. How could no one see the signs? The truth is, there were signs, subtle ones that, in isolation, meant nothing. But taken together, they painted a picture that was missed until it was too late. Thomas Harker had no close friends. He was friendly with everyone but intimate with no one. He never allowed people into his home beyond the front rooms. He worked alone, ate alone, lived alone. His life was compartmentalized to an extreme degree. He was controlling. Everything in his life ran on a strict schedule. Everything had its place. This extended to his interactions with others. He'd become visibly uncomfortable when plans changed unexpectedly, when conversations deviated from expected patterns. He showed interest in others but never shared anything personal about himself. Neighbors could tell you everything Thomas knew about their lives, but realized after his arrest that they knew virtually nothing about his. Where did he grow up? What was his family like? What did he do for fun? No one knew. And there was the garden, the obsessive care he took with it, the way he became agitated if anyone touched his plants, the fact that he worked in the backyard at odd hours, often late at night. One neighbor reported seeing him in his garden at 3 a.m, digging by flashlight. At the time, they'd thought it was quirky. Now they knew it was something else. But perhaps the most telling sign was one that only came to light during the trial. Several women in Ridgemont, when interviewed, mentioned uncomfortable interactions with Thomas Harker. Nothing criminal, nothing even worth reporting, just moments where he stood too close, where his smile felt wrong, where he asked questions that seemed innocent but felt invasive. A woman who worked at the grocery store said he'd once asked her what time she got off work, what route she took home. She'd felt uncomfortable but told herself she was being paranoid. A college student said he'd offered her a ride home from the library when her car wouldn't start. She'd declined, feeling uneasy, and later felt foolish for being suspicious of a nice man trying to help. Kat Morrison wasn't the first woman to sense danger from Thomas Harker. She was just the first to report it, the first to be believed, the first to escape. The town of Ridgemont, Pennsylvania. One has never fully recovered. The population has declined by nearly 40% since 1997. People moved away, unable to live with the knowledge of what had happened in their quiet streets. Property values plummeted. Businesses closed. The annual county fair no longer includes a garden competition. No one wanted to participate after what they learned. The library where Thomas volunteered changed its volunteer policies, implementing extensive background checks and never allowing volunteers to work alone with patrons. First Presbyterian Church, where Thomas attended services, saw attendance drop dramatically. People couldn't reconcile how evil could sit in the pews beside them, could sing hymns and bow its head in prayer while planning unspeakable acts. The pastor who'd known Thomas, who'd shaken his hand every Sunday, left the ministry entirely. He couldn't find faith anymore. Couldn't believe in a God who would allow something like Thomas Harker to exist. But there are those who refuse to let evil win. The families who stayed in Ridgemont, who continue to honor their daughter's memories. Detective Chen, who continues to seek justice. Kat Morrison, who helps other survivors find their strength. There's an annual memorial service on June 14th, the anniversary of Jennifer Roth's disappearance. People gather at the small park that was once 1847 Maple Grove Lane. They bring flowers, never roses, never hydrangeas, never anything that grew in that cursed soil. They bring daisies, carnations, sunflowers. They speak the names of the dead, Jennifer, Rebecca, Ashley, and the names of the others, the ones who might have been, as the 17 ghosts that haunt the investigation. They light candles, they hold each other, they remember, and they watch their neighbors just a little more carefully now. On a cold January night in 2004, 7 years after his conviction, Thomas Harker requested a meeting with Detective Sarah Chen. It was unusual. He'd refused all interview requests since his arrest, had never spoken to police, press, or even his own lawyers beyond what was absolutely necessary. Chen debated whether to go. She'd moved on from the case, had closed that chapter of her life as much as anyone could. But something drew her to that prison, to that meeting. Maybe it was closure, Maybe it was the hope that he'd finally reveal the truth about the other victims. They sat across from each other in a small room, a table between them, a guard at the door. Thomas Harker looked older. Prison had aged him, hollowed him out. But his eyes were the same, cold, empty, calculating. "Thank you for coming," he said, polite as ever. "I wanted to tell you something." Chen said nothing, just waited. "You think you caught me because you were smart," Thomas said. "Because you connected the dots? Because you did good police work? And you did. You were thorough. Commendable, really." He leaned forward slightly. "But the truth is, Detective, I let you catch me." Chen felt her blood run cold. "Kat Morrison wasn't a mistake," Thomas continued. "I grabbed her arm in that parking lot knowing she'd report it. I was sloppy with her on purpose. After 15 years, after 17 subjects across 3 states, I was tired. The thrill was gone. It had become routine, mechanical. I wanted to be caught. I wanted the world to see my work. I wanted the recognition." He smiled then, that same small private smile from the courtroom. "And now I'm famous. Now people study me, write about me, try to understand me. Students in criminal justice classes watch videos about my case. My journals are locked in an FBI archive, but someday they'll be studied by researchers. I'll be remembered forever." "You're a monster," Chen said quietly. "I'm a god," Thomas replied. "I had complete control over life and death. I decided when they suffered and when it ended. I created beauty from their remains. Those roses everyone admired, those were my artwork. Those tomatoes that won prizes, those were my masterpieces. I transformed death into life, horror into beauty. I'm more than a monster, Detective. I'm an artist." Chen stood up, signaled to the guard. She'd heard enough. "Wait," Thomas said. "Don't you want to know about the others? The 17 cases you never solved?" Chen paused at the door. "There were 23, Thomas said. "Not 17, 23 women over 15 years, and you'll never find them all. Some of them are in gardens that have been paved over. Some are in forests where I scattered the remains. One is in a lake, weighted down, feeding the fish. They're gone, Detective. But they made me who I am. They gave me purpose." "You're insane," Chen said. "No," Thomas replied, still smiling. "I'm just honest about what I am. Most people spend their lives pretending to be something they're not, hiding their true nature behind social niceties and moral codes they don't really believe in. I simply stopped pretending. I embraced my truth, and for 15 years, I was free." Chen left the room, left the prison, drove home in silence. She never spoke publicly about that conversation, never told the families what Thomas had said. Some truths are too cruel to share, but she wrote it all down in a sealed report, locked away in evidence storage. Someday, when everyone involved is gone, when the wounds are old enough, someone will open that report and read Thomas Harker's final confession. That there were 23 victims, that 6 of them were never identified, that he'd chosen to be caught because he wanted the fame, the notoriety, the immortality, that he'd won. Thomas Harker died in prison in September of 2019 at the age of 72. Stroke, sudden and massive. He was found in his cell, face down, pen still in his hand, working on journal number 18. No one claimed his body. The state cremated him, scattered his ashes in an unmarked location. There is no grave, no memorial, nothing to mark that he existed. But in Ridgemont, Pennsylvania, in a small park where a house once stood, the flowers still bloom every spring. Different flowers now, planted by volunteers, tended by a community that refuses to forget. Daisies and carnations and sunflowers, bright and alive under the sun. And in the FBI archives, in sealed evidence boxes, 17 journals sit in climate-controlled darkness. 17 journals filled with neat handwriting, clinical observations, sketches and diagrams. 17 journals that detail horrors no one should have to read, that document a darkness most people can't imagine. But here's what will haunt you, what should haunt you. Watch what haunts the families and the investigators and everyone who knows the true story. Journal number 18 was never finished. Thomas Harker was adding to it the day he died. The last entry, dated the morning of his death, contains one line. Subject 24, initial observation phase complete. Acquisition planned for. The sentence ends there, unfinished, interrupted by death. The police investigated, of course. searched for any possible accomplice, any co-conspirator who might have been planning to continue his work. They found nothing. Thomas Harker had been in solitary confinement for 22 years. He had no contact with the outside world, no way to plan or execute anything. The entry was most likely a fantasy, a delusion, the desperate scribblings of a dying man clinging to his identity as a predator. Most likely. But every year on the anniversary of Jennifer Roth's disappearance, Detective Sarah Chen, now retired, does a search. Young women reported missing in Pennsylvania. New cases that match the pattern. Disappearances without witnesses, without evidence, without explanation. Just to be sure, just in case. Because the thing about true evil is that it's patient, it's careful, it hides in plain sight, behind friendly smiles and immaculate lawns and prize-winning gardens. And it's never just one person. Somewhere right now in a quiet town you've never heard of, there's a neighbor everyone trusts, someone who keeps their lawn perfect, who volunteers at the local library, who brings cookies to block parties, someone who's just installed a privacy fence in their backyard, someone who's just bought a wood chipper, someone who started a garden, and you'll never see them come.